Hey everyone, it's Amy again, and I've got my friend Josh McElroy back again. We've done an interview previously. You should check that out. It's a really good one. But I brought Josh back here to talk about the industry, where you see that going, where you see it's been. We can just kind of start with your experience. Josh, you trained horses for the public and taught kids as well, right?
Yep, yep. I've trained not so much anymore once I kind of had my family and retired out of the military, but I trained from for the public from the time I was about 9 years old till I was probably 40.
What kind of training did you do?
A lot of cold starting, and then I would do, I wouldn't say a lot of problem horses, but there would be folks who would have an issue that they couldn't seem to get past or something like that, and they would call me, and so I would work with kind of some of the common issues that we see, and then I also did kind of ranch roping, ranch work in general, training for folks to put on their horses.
And what was your general client base, if you had to generalize it?
Um,
What kind of,
Probably 25 years ago, it ranged from um probably 60-40, 45 to 65-year-old female clients being the majority. And then I've I've worked a lot for older farmers who are probably, farmers and ranchers who are in their early 60s to mid 60s who, couldn't get on young horses anymore, but they still needed some work done. So I worked quite a bit for that demographic for a little while, but as the industry has changed, that's sort of changed over the last 25 years.
so the you're probably a better horse trainer than me, but did you
I doubt it.
when I was training horses for the public, one of the biggest issues that I found was getting the training to stick when the horse went home. Did you experience that?
Yeah, and a it's not through a fault of the clients, but a lot of times I call the job security as a trainer, right? And I have a couple of friends that we still kind of joke with it about that you if you train for the public, then you'll have that horse for 90 days, 120 days, and it'll take about that long for everything you put in to be pulled out of the horse by the client or owner. And then they would probably need to come back to you to refresh all the stuff that you would put in them. Um, so, I mean, I had the advantage of having been on a lot of horses and done a lot of stuff, and your client base probably isn't that way. They're not uh they're not working ranch folks who have been on a bunch of different kinds of horses and types of horses that have a little different brains and had to kind of get a broad variety of training. That wasn't where they live, so I don't fault the clientele for that, but it's you you put in and then it takes a little while, but the client, unless they have kind of come along with you and learned how they need to ride and how things work, it'll take them that long to kind of pull that training out, and then they're going to be closer to where they started probably.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues of training is just that, is that, you are coming in with your experience, your feel, your abilities, and you're sending the horse back home to a client who just doesn't have that experience and that feel, and the horse doesn't maintain what you put in because they're not a robot. They're responding to.
Hmm.
So if we had a perfect world scenario, what would you say would be the ideal um setup for training to stick?
Um, I'd say that uh, the ideal setup for training to stick would be that folks who bought a horse learned how to ride horses before they bought the horse, um, and not, I use ride horses as a generalized term, but ride the type of horse and the way that they're going to ride, learn that first, um, before they purchase one, so that they have the ability to either hold in what you've put in or put in to that horse, more. Um, I think that if you had a barn where if it was me and I had my ideal, I'd have the horse for 2 or 3 uh, weeks, especially if I wasn't, starting a colt. And, unpopular opinion, green horses and green riders is never a good combination. I don't care what you think, you can't start a horse from ground up and not leave a few holes if you have no idea what you're doing. So that's, I think, a bad combination. But if the horse already has some foundation, then having the owner or the client come in and ride that horse and let you explain and talk through, this is why I do things this way. This is how this horse responds. Hey, try this and see if that works. So that they kind of understand where the horse is coming from, and the horse begins to understand how they cue. Uh, as a trainer, we always want the horse to be a little more feely for us, and I think it does the horse kind of a disservice at times, because we'll put the horse to where we would want our own mount, and then it sets that horse up for some confusion on the
Yeah, that's
backside when they go to
why
somebody
I'm a
else who
really
doesn't
bad
have that.
horse trainer.
Yeah.
Bull.
Um, so if I'm riding, starting a horse for somebody or working on a horse, I tend to try to ride like a 10-year-old kid who really doesn't know a lot. Um, and if the horse can wrap their mind around that, then the owner being out of place a couple of times when they shouldn't be is probably not going to be a big deal.
Did you got a lot of experience through your raising, you were around horses as a young kid too, but did you do a lot of internships, working
Um,
student stuff?
I haven't done a lot of like full-time traditional internships, simply because of the way my life ran. I would say I've made relationships more with folks who were way handier than I was, um, and then was able to kind of, through that relationship and friendship, pick their brain and say, hey, what do we do on this? How would you approach that? But I haven't done, uh, I guess you would say, a traditional internship like you would see for a lot of the larger name trainers nowadays.
So yeah, what I'm getting at is one of the most important things to be able to get along with a wide variety of horses is experience, right? Is you grew up riding different horses, you made connections with people that could help you and teach you. Um, and for most people, if they're not born on a ranch or surrounded by horse people, a working student situation, a teacher, a mentor, somebody who's going to take you in and educate you, and you have to watch the ins and outs for a period of time to get an education. That is a crucial bit for getting an education and experience. And that, I think, is one of the things that's going away that alarms me a little bit about the current industry is the ability to gain that experience, to come under somebody's wing. Um, where do you see that?
Um, I've I've seen it in a couple of different areas, but I wholeheartedly agree that um there is a lack of ability for kids who don't have the advantage of that being kind of their family's lifestyle to step into that role, simply because horse ownership is not as prevalent. So you've got a decrease in that aspect of it, right? But also the way in which I've seen, and sure it's not all, but I've seen that the the folks who are really good and grew up knowing this, like if you're $1 million rider, you're not riding all your horses all the time. You've got folks who are loping your horses for you, and your job is you're the master. You do the fine work, the finish work, and they do everything else, and you can talk them through that. I think that there are less and less kids who are able to do that, not necessarily that they aren't wanting to, but I think it's the way that the culture has structured it. I'm not as familiar with the dressage world or the equitation world, but I know in the Western world that um, I've seen quite a few times where the quote unquote interns would come in, and you had a person who was really wanting to learn, um, and either didn't get paid at all, uh, or got paid pittance for the amount of work they put in, 10, 12-hour days. And 20 years ago, that probably would have been fine, except for now you have a greater cost of living overall for anybody, especially working students, that kind of thing. It is a greater cost of living. So for them to advance their own life and own career, they do need to make money. And so you either have to have a financial backer, like your parents are paying for your all of your stuff, or you've got another job, or the position that you're in needs to pay something so that you can put food on your own table and that kind of thing. Um, and I think at least what I've seen is that the culture is has stagnated at 20 years ago, and the cost of living and the structure of society has moved on. So there's still an ideology in some of the training barns that I've seen that, you're lucky to work here, and you're lucky to clean stalls for me for 12 hours a day. Um, and I'll talk to you about horses in a month. And I see a lot of it even outside the riding industry, in some of the thoroughbred industry, where there's a high burnout rate and
Mhm.
they can't seem to find good help. But when you ask or you see anybody who works on one of those operations, what kind of hours they work, or how they're treated poorly, paid poorly, and worked longer hours than you would want to work. Um, and so I think that as society is structured, those younger kids who really would want to do that are coming in and saying, "Hey, I can't even afford to buy ramen and eat, and I've got to work 2 or 3 months of 12-hour days before I'll learn anything." And so I think that the value exchange that I grew up kind of being told is, you are exchanging what you know for the value that I provide you, and not having to pay an exorbitant amount to do all this other stuff or have to do it yourself. I think that the value exchange has become unequal. And
Yeah.
from what I've seen, that even if you were to pay somebody $10 an hour to clean stalls, um, that would be that would be right at what they could use. But I've seen a lot of times where it, averages out to $2 an hour
Yeah.
for somebody. And especially if you've got younger kids who you might want to bring up and into that, they're seeing their friends in high school make $15 an hour at Taco Bell where they work, and being able to work part-time and still have the ability to do stuff when, they've worked for 3 or 4 weeks and got $200.
Yeah, that's something that I've been experiencing as a teacher is I see these young gifted kids coming up and want to take them in under my wing to develop them, and they're not interested in the suffering required in the horse industry to get, because when I was learning, I didn't have a horse family, so I did internships that I paid to do or unpaid internships, and then it eventually graduated into a really crappy wage for like a rat-infested single wide trailer for riding 20 colts a day. You know what I mean? And that's just not
Hmm.
going to fly for today's world anymore. Um, but there's not a huge margin in the profit. Like I could not afford to pay a young person fairly right now. Because I don't my profit margin is so low, right? So
Right.
what has to give, do you think, for us to keep young people involved? Because, we're all aging out of riding colts. Um, Somebody has to ride the colts. Who's going to do it, and how do we get that? How do we keep these kids interested short of
Um,
becoming millionaires?
yeah, that's that's always an option, less for guys like me. But the that's a it's a hard question, right? Because it would go to the consumer population who's purchasing and where are they at and um what do you intend to do with that knowledge, that skill set. uh I think that a lot of while the newer fascination with the Western lifestyle has come up through the television side and that people like are interested, which is great because it gives you a market for your skills. Um, I The market isn't large enough to support people who aren't on a competitive level.
Hmm.
Um, so speaking for the Western industry, like the Western industry, they make their money from competition. Um, Whether that's in rodeo or whether that's, in rein cow horse or traditional reining or, those are competitive events that pay back uh, the trainers, whether that's through people bringing you horses to train or whether that's through horse sales. Those pay, and right now they pay fairly well. Um, However, there's also an amount of folks who are in the middle that are still living that way, and I think it's part of it is a job of those of us who are in that lifestyle and living that to be realistic with the people we talk to. Um, because if I see, Yellowstone on TV as a young kid, the fact that those cowboys live in a bunkhouse sounds romantic, but they're not paid to go have a place somewhere else. They live in a bunkhouse and they work 14-hour days. Um, so being able to educate the the young people to say, hey, if this is what you feel like you want to do, then you need to be realistic about what you expect to make.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's true across the agricultural board, right? There's very few people who get rich farming. That's not what you do. You do that because you love to be a steward of the land and of the culture, and that's something that is, either innate or in your family. But there, nobody gets into horse training wanting to be rich realistically. Now there are people who get into it thinking that they're gonna be rich, and it's just like any other business. You have cost margins, and your time is worth money, and you have to put food on your table. So it's finding or educating the upcoming generation in where they could market those skills and how to market those skills because I think the money still exists in the industry. I mean, there's still quite a few people buying horses, um, and so I think it's still there. But I also agree with you that it's hard to hand it to a new generation with the expectation that I'm only going to have to work 4 hours a day,
Yeah.
and um, that'll be that'll be really easy. But it's also incumbent upon us if we're at the point where we need help to be able to accomplish our job, then I think it's also incumbent upon us as the quote unquote adults in the industry to say, okay, I I'm looking for somebody to help me, so I may need to invest in that person, both financially and with knowledge, because just like any other place you would go or any other industry, if you invest in your workers, your cost margins are not your profit margins are not going to go up. They're going to go down, but your quality of life would go up, and you will have people who will do more for you without you having to ask
Mhm.
and give you more value because they understand that you value them. And I think a lot of the older generation, us included, is we grew up under a you know a, or for lack of a better word, like an internship system, and you were much more trade focused, and so if somebody knew something that you wanted to know, you just went and did that.
Do you
um
think that's dead and gone, that system of trade
yeah,
knowledge?
yeah. And so I mean, we can complain about it all we want to, or we can change the way we do things. I think that a lot of people spend a lot of time complaining about how the world is, but we don't have the ability to fix society writ large, so we might as well learn to do what we can in the world that exists as it is now.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to talk to you because complaining, I mean, every horse trainer in the world is complaining about what they can't make, how they can't change the industry and young people today. And that's why I thought this would be an interesting conversation because you have more experience with younger people than I do. I taught little bitty kids. You were teaching kids that were getting ready to make life decisions. So investing in those people, it sounds like investing in people that are young people, little bitty, all the way to coming of age is the way forward.
I think I think it is. I think that it's it's very important if you love the life you live and you value the skill set that you have, then it's important to share that and teach that to the younger generation. And not everybody is going to love it as much as you do, and not everybody is going to be willing to sacrifice as much as you are right then. And it's a fact of teaching teenagers, right? We have teenagers and horses look pretty similar neurologically. Um, and so I don't expect that teenager to be able to predict long-term fulfillment from what I'm giving them now. But if I don't give it to them now, they'll never achieve it because they will be inundated with the media that comes in that pushes, if you are not happy all the time, your mental health is somehow suffering.
Yeah, that's a huge
Um,
problem for that age group, especially now.
yeah. And we were, you know, some for good, some for bad, but our generation was not taught that way. We were taught that bad things are going to happen and you got to get up. Like, you just got to get up and keep moving. And your ability to get up and keep moving, and sort of the get back on the horse
Healing
mantra.
weren't a thing back then.
Yeah, like,
It didn't exist.
well, and I think there's some validity to a
Both.
good focus on mental health, but I also think that the the conversation should not be based around your individual happiness all the time. But I I don't see many folks who are horse trainers who don't love their job. Like, they they may not be super nice people to everybody, but they love what they do. Um, and they wouldn't take any amount of money to go do something else,
Yeah.
even though they might be capable of doing 50 other things, but they love what they do. So I think that educating and sharing that passion is a better way forward, but also knowing that you can't run your horse training business like Walmart and pay your employees pittance while your margins go up.
Well,
You
that
have to
was the
val
other I was going to ask you. When I was training horses, I was trying to subsidize paying an employee well to educate them and the whole thing, but I basically couldn't charge enough to the consumer to cover that. Like there's a limit, at least in my experience, of how much people can pay. If you have good clients that actually care about their horse, they're not millionaires, they're middle class, right? So where does the money to subsidize the younger people come from?
and I don't think it's necessarily all incumbent upon you as the trainer. If you were to look at how you interacted with those folks who you had in, how many hours per day were one-on-one with you translating knowledge to them for the specific purpose of advancing their career, right? That's not out of the 10 hours that we might spend together. That's not a huge portion of the time. A portion of the time is I'm going to show you how I do this, and then I'm going to let you run with it for a little while, and then I'll check back and be like, oh, hey, that's working or that's not working, and why do you think that is? Let's fix that. So I also think that if we're realistic, I need somebody to help me get horses up, saddled, stalls clean in the morning, and then I can operate, you know, and then in the evening, I might need somebody for something. So instead of having one person that I try to pay $20 an hour and I can't charge enough on my margins, I might have one person that I go into it telling them, hey, this is a part-time gig for you. I'm going to leave you time open to have another job, but I'll share with you when you're here. I'm going to be here with you, and we're going to have an exchange of information and skills, but I'm not going to keep you here all day doing stuff for me because I can't afford it, you can't afford it, but I can provide you value for when you're here. And I think that is a way. Again, I'm definitely not smart enough to solve all the world's problems, so I don't want to say that that's the way, but I think it's a way for the younger generation to go in. If they go in full time, unless you grew up in agriculture, working an 8-hour day when you're 15, 16 years old is completely foreign,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so I think that easing them into it of once they start to do things and then they see, okay, this is a longer day than I had anticipated, but you don't start somebody out who has been on the couch for 12 hours of the 24-hour day and then expect them to go work outside in all weather conditions 12 hours of the 24. You'll burn them into the ground and they'll quit. And that person might have been a really, really good employee and an amazing trainer later on, but they were burned because we didn't, as the the seniors in that relationship, understand how to transition somebody in today's society versus when we grew up. And if you're going to come work with me, you're working when I'm working. I don't care what you did, get tougher.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing that I'm hearing out of this is that we have to do a better job of trying to see from the perspective of the younger people today. Because even just this short period of time apart from our generation to theirs, the world has changed so much.
Oh yeah, I was talking with a colleague this past weekend, and she's not, but I think she's closer to your age. She's 8 to 10 years younger than I am, and we were talking about how things communicated in high school, and she was like, "Oh, you would get a text message, and we would go," and I was like, I had I didn't even have a one myself. I had a friend who we thought was rich because he had a bag phone in his car. Um, and so if you look at that in like true time,
Yeah.
the from the time that we had a quote unquote mobile phone until now when I'm talking to you on a computer that's capable of doing far more than most home computers 10 years ago. Um, that advance of society is not kept up mentally from our generation. Like, it's just not.
Yeah, I
And
remember
we're
calling my mom to tell her to come pick me up from school in the nurse's office with a rotary phone when I was in
Mhm.
elementary school.
Yeah. And so, and it's as much as people want to complain about the younger generation, it's 100% our job
Yeah.
to teach them how to do what we expect of them. Um, and I see this across all business areas, all industries that I've ever been a part of in consulting, talking to people. Um, Leadership is your job. If you're in the senior position, it is your job to be a leader, and leaders teach and mentor. They don't push people around and expect them to do things without teaching them. It's just not how it's done. Um, and so if you want things to change, you need to change the way you interact with the people around you and the people who are lower than you on whatever totem pole it is. And I think it's incumbent upon us, especially in the horse industry, to understand that while we may not like everything the younger generation does or has been exposed to or whatever, that's the way the world is. And if we want our way of life to continue, then we need to understand how they look at the world, see the world, and we need to flex a little bit on our side to teach them the values that we value. And as they then grow up, I think, and I've seen it in some of the kids I taught in high school, they begin to value those things too because they were taught the value of it as they grew up, but it wasn't a hard switch for them in their brain.
Yeah. Well, it's almost time, I think, to wrap it up because I know you've got to go. But that's the perfect thing to end on is just to summarize. We need to understand the younger generation better to preserve the industry if we're going to at all, and lead by example, mentor, provide opportunity, but provide it in the way that they can manage while we transition them. Does that sound like an accurate summary?
Yeah, I think it's incumbent upon us to do all those things that you talked about and understand that our way of doing things is a good way, but if you can't change the way you do things and still get the same outcome that you were looking for, then you as a person or as a trainer don't know enough, and it's incumbent upon us to learn as much as we can about everything. So
That damn personal responsibility.
yeah, my favorite saying came from a buddy of mine in the military, and I probably don't. I'll attribute it to him. Uh, but you can delegate authority, not responsibility.
It's a good one.
I try to live by that one.
I'm writing that down. All right, Josh. Well, this was really fun. We should definitely find another spicy topic and get into it again.
All right, I look forward to it.
Okay, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.
All right, talk to you later.
Bye.